You've taken the classes, watched the videos, and listened to the coaches. You've sat in meetings, and you've lived through the relationships. Some incredible, and some a little traumatic. And somehow in all that life, you gathered lessons, instincts, and wisdom. But how often do you actually use them? This episode is about reactivating the knowledge you already have, but may have forgotten. And it's about treating your lived experience like a warehouse of usable resources. That's your internal stock. Your inventory isn't just for emergencies. It's for strategy and leadership and growth and responding rather than reacting. Because here's the truth. We don't always need something new. Sometimes we need something remembered. And when you've already developed the set of predetermined responses, tools that align with who you are and where you want to go, you move through challenges with clarity and confidence. And this isn't about reflection, as it is more about application. So whether you lead teams in a boardroom or you're trying to lead yourself out of a chaotic season, you have more in your internal toolkit than you actually think. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. Welcome to the show. Let's talk about what you've forgotten. And not because it wasn't important, but because life made you believe it wasn't worth remembering. You've taken in more knowledge than you give yourself credit for. You've sat through training that seemed boring at the time and later became essential. You've lived through moments that sharpened you, broke you open, or built you back up. But then the world told you to move on, so you did. And now, here you are, still trying to figure out things whilst carrying an entire vault of forgotten files, untapped brilliance, underused tools, or dormant instincts. That's what this episode is about. Your internal stock, your internal inventory. We live in a time that constantly pushes us to consume more books, more content, more courses, more apps, more expert opinions. But what if I told you the thing you actually need right now is something you already have, something you already know? See, people think growth is only about acquiring new things, but real lasting transformation, it often comes from applying what you've already learned but haven't used in a while. You ever open up a drawer and find something valuable you forgot you even owned? That's you, every day. You've got a drawer full of wisdom, but we don't check it as often as we should. We go back to the same old default settings. We panic when the unexpected hits, and we forget to ask ourselves, wait, haven't I been here before? Some of your greatest assets are already inside you. That time you navigated conflict with calm. That project you pulled off when everyone else was frozen. The moment you said the right thing at the right time, and it changed the game. The breakup that taught you your boundaries. The breakdown that introduced you to your limits. Those things didn't just happen to you, they built you. And you're not empty, you're underutilized. And that stops now. We're flipping the switch right here, right now. From this moment forward, I want you to stop looking outside of yourself for every answer and start asking, what do I already know that I've stopped trusting? Because this season of your life might not need something new. It might just need something remembered. So here's your first challenge. This week, write down 5 situations you've already navigated well. Personal, professional, emotional, spiritual, and then label that skill that you used. then ask yourself, why did I stop using that? We hear a lot about learning to lead, courses, books, seminars. But leadership, real leadership, you don't just learn it, you live through it. You get pressed, tested, called on in moments when nobody else wants to raise their hand. And that's not theory, that's instinct. And it doesn't disappear just because you've changed jobs or stepped into a new phase of your life. It just gets buried under the noise. And I'm here to tell you, it's still there. You've led before, even if you didn't call it that at the time. You've been the one that people turn to when the pressure is high and the plan is falling apart. You've steadied someone else's chaos whilst your own world was spinning. And you've been the quiet anchor in the room. You've been the first to speak up. And you've been the last one standing. That's leadership. Not always pretty, not always praised, but always real. And somewhere along the way, some of us started to believe that leadership was reserved for people with titles, that we needed more experience, a certification, someone else's permission. But let me ask you this. How many of your most powerful leadership moments came with a warning or applause? Probably none. They came when things had to be done, when people were watching even if you didn't know it, and when you had no roadmap but kept moving anyway. And that's the kind of leadership that doesn't come from a PowerPoint. It comes from pressure. And if you've been through enough, that leadership never really leaves you. It just waits for the next moment to rise again. So here's what I want you to understand. Leadership is something you reclaim. It's already in you, stored in moments, memories, scars, and small wins. You don't need to become someone else to lead. You need to return to the version of you who already did it, who showed up in the fire, who didn't flinch when things got messy. That version of you still exists. It may be beneath the exhaustion, beneath the doubt, or beneath whatever life has piled on since. This is where internal stock and inventory becomes personal. Because the moment you start to take full inventory of the leader you've already been, you stop second guessing whether you're ready now. And the truth is, you've already proven it. You just haven't reclaimed it. And here's your second challenge. Ask two people who've seen you under pressure. I mean, really seen you. Ask them this. When have you watched me lead, even when I didn't realize I was? And listen closely. Let it remind you who you've always been. All right, this is one of my favorite parts of the episode. Let me tell you something that most people don't realize until it's too late. If you don't choose the response ahead of time, the moment will choose it for you. And guess what? Most of the time, it chooses chaos. It chooses fear. Or it chooses ego. And you want to know what separates real leaders from those who fold under fire? It's not confidence. And it's not charisma. And it's not even experience. It's preparation on the inside. A predetermined response is when you decide, ahead of time, how you're going to show up when the pressure's on, when the conversation gets heated, when the project starts falling apart, when someone disrespects you in front of the team, when you're blindsided in a meeting, or when your personal life spills into your work life and threatens to unravel it all. Most people react. Leaders respond on purpose. But let me be real with you. This isn't easy. And you're not always going to feel calm. You're not always going to feel like the bigger person. You're going to want to lash out or defend yourself or raise your voice or maybe even walk out the door or burn it all down, and that's human. But power is when you already decide who you're going to be before the moment asks you to prove it. And that's why we build internal stock. That's why we keep inventory. Because when the storm comes, and it always does, you don't always have time to figure it out, and you have to remember. You have to retrieve. So let's get tactical for a second. Start thinking about the moments that typically knock you off your center. We all have them. A coworker talks over you in a meeting. Someone sends that passive-aggressive email. A friend ghosts you. Your manager criticizes your work publicly. Or your kid throws a tantrum whilst you're on a Zoom call. Or your ex texts you out of nowhere. What's your go-to reaction? Now ask yourself, what would a predetermined response look like? What would it sound like to pause, breathe, and say, I've been here before, and I already decided how I'd handle this? That's power. That's presence. And that's leadership on autopilot in the best way. Because when you've predetermined your response, the moment doesn't own you. You own the moment. All right, here's your next challenge. Choose one trigger that regularly disrupts your peace. Just one. Now, write the exact sentence you will use next time it happens, and then say it out loud and store it. That's your first predetermined response. Lock it in. Let's talk about all the voices in your head. And no, I don't mean the wild kind. I mean the constant stream of input from outside sources. Podcasts, panels, advisors, social media experts. Everyone with an opinion, everyone with a solution, or everyone with a you should. Now, don't get me wrong, insight is valuable, as is community. But there's a fine line between receiving guidance and outsourcing your entire decision-making process. There's a moment when you stop learning and start leaning too far. When every question you face gets kicked outward instead of inward. When instead of asking, what do I think? Or what do I know? You skip straight to the, let me ask someone. And you forget your own signal. And here's the dangerous part. The more noise you let in, the harder it is to hear yourself. The harder it is to trust your gut. And the harder it is to lead. Because clarity doesn't come from volume. It comes from alignment. And you're not a beginner anymore. You've done the work. You've made the calls. You've lived through enough to build an internal compass. One that doesn't need to be voted on every time you face resistance. So, why do we still keep second-guessing ourselves? Because trusting yourself requires risk. It requires ownership. If your decision flops and the advice came from someone else, you can blame them. But if it comes from your gut, that's on you. And that level of accountability is scary. But it's also where freedom lives. You can't lead with clarity if your internal GPS is constantly overridden by outside voices. At some point, you have to hit mute on the noise and turn the volume up on your own signal. That doesn't mean you never ask for help. That doesn't mean you ignore wisdom. But it does mean you treat your own discernment with the respect it deserves. It means you give yourself a seat at your own decision-making table. You've been trained, you've been tested, you've got the receipts. It's time to stop doubting and start dialing in. So, before you Google, before you text someone for input, or before you crowdsource your next move, pause. Go inward. And ask yourself, have I been here before? What did I learn the last time? What do I already know deep down that I'm pretending not to know right now? Then move from that place. That's how you lead with confidence. That's how you build trust in yourself. That's how you activate your internal stock. Not with more noise, but with a clear signal. So here's your next challenge. The next time you're stuck on a decision, wait 24 hours before asking anyone else for input. And in that window, journal out your own thoughts, instincts, and ideas. At the end of that 24 hours, compare your original take to whatever outside input you get. You might be surprised by how right you already were. You want to know what the best training program you've ever been through is? Life. Not the workshop, not the webinar, and not the book you never finished, but life. The real lessons didn't show up on slides. They came through seasons. They came when you failed. when you recovered, when someone let you down, when you let yourself down, when you realized you were capable of more than you ever gave yourself credit for. That's the curriculum. It's not structured. It's not tidy. It doesn't hand out certificates, but it's real. It's lived, and it's honest. So many people disqualify themselves from leadership, from calling the shots, from trusting their own voice, because they haven't had the right training. But the truth is, most people making real impact in the world are working off of wisdom, not just instruction. They're pulling from lived experience. And that's where the power comes from. Let me say this clearly. Your experience counts. You've navigated hard conversations. You've built trust from scratch. You've made something out of nothing. You've held it together when everything was falling apart. That's not fluff. That's not personality. That's preparation. But we've been conditioned to believe that unless it came from a textbook or a degree program, it doesn't count. So we minimize our experience. We talk around it. We assume we're just figuring it out, whilst other people really know what they're doing. Let me challenge that. Start treating your life like a curriculum. Start honoring what it taught you. Start drawing from it. And not just emotionally, but strategically. For example, if you were raised in chaos and learned to stay calm under pressure, that's crisis leadership. If you had to figure things out on your own, that's resourcefulness. If you learned how to read a room growing up, that's emotional intelligence. If you've navigated heartbreak and still show up with empathy, that's strength. This is the inventory we're talking about, and you've been building it quietly for years. And now it's time to activate it on purpose. Because what you've lived through is not random. It's not wasted. It's your prep work, your foundation, or your reference manual. And when you stop waiting for someone else to certify you, and you start pulling from the lessons you've already learned, you stop playing small. You don't need anyone's permission to lead. You need to recognize what already made you ready. And here's your next challenge. Before I share with you the challenge, I want you to understand that these challenges are not gigantic. They're doable. They're bite-sized chunks. They're baby steps. They're meant to be able to help you to overcome the adversity that you're going through or to conquer your goals. Okay? So here you go. Write down 3 moments in your life that taught you something essential, something that still guides you on how you move today. Label each one with a leadership skill that it gave you. Then ask yourself, where in my current life am I underusing this? You want to lead people well or with effectiveness? Start with how you lead yourself when no one's watching. Because people can feel when your leadership is performative. They can sense when your words don't match your walk. And the most impactful leaders aren't perfect. They're aligned. And that alignment starts with inventory, with checking in on yourself before you check in on the team. Before you coach someone else through a storm, ask, have I weathered mine? And before you tell someone to stay grounded, ask, am I breathing through my own chaos or just reacting? The truth is, you can't guide someone to safety if you haven't learned how to find your own footing. You can't call others to clarity if you're living in confusion. And you sure as hell can't ask for accountability if you haven't practiced it yourself. That's why this work, this inner stock, this quiet inventory, it's not optional. It's the prerequisite for powerful, sustainable leadership. When you lead from remembered experience, not just theory, you build trust faster. People don't just listen, they lean in. Because what you have to say carries weight, not from a script, not from your scars, but from your wins and from what you've earned. And let's be real, people are tired of being managed. They want to be led. They want to be led by someone who's done the work, who can hold space without needing to control it, who doesn't flinch when things get messy, who doesn't crumble when pressure shows up. You want to know how to lead people through uncertainty? Lead with your own certainty. Not certainty about the outcome, certainty about who you are in the middle of it all. That's the kind of leadership that changes rooms, that builds movements, that creates cultures where people feel safe enough to be real, take risks, and grow. So here's your sixth challenge. This week, notice one area where your leadership with others doesn't match your leadership with yourself, and then close the gap. Show up first, then invite others to follow. We've spent this whole episode digging through your stock, your wisdom, your leadership, your past responses, your pain turned into power. And now it's time to drive one last thing home. You don't need more to be more. You already have the tools. You already have the instincts. But the tools are useless if you never pull them off the shelf. So here's the final call. Trust what you've built. You've done that work. You've survived the hard seasons. You've collected the skills, sharpened awareness, and formed responses that are deeply rooted in who you are. The challenge now is to stop questioning them. Stop waiting for a crisis to access your strength and start making that strength a baseline. Stop treating your instincts like a backup plan and start moving with them as your first line of strategy. Because here's the thing. When you trust your internal tools, you move faster, clearer, more grounded. You don't waste time asking 10 other people what they'd do before listening to what you already know. You stop looking for templates and you become the person who builds them. And no, this doesn't mean you don't keep learning or growing, but it means you stop learning from a place of insecurity. You stop consuming information like you're broken, and you start learning like a leader, adding to something strong, not searching for something missing. Let this land. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from strength. And here's your final challenge. Pick one internal tool you've underused. Your empathy, your discipline, your ability to see the big picture. And then choose to lead with it this week. Let it guide a decision. Let it shape a conversation. Let it remind you of what's already in the toolkit. You've made it through the full inventory. You dug into what you've learned, what you've survived, and what you've stopped using, but shouldn't have. So now what? Now you activate. You stop doubting the value of your life experience. You stop pretending you're behind. And you start pulling from what you already know, and you lead with it. Because the most powerful leaders in the room are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who remember who they are before the moment calls on them. That's you now. That's who you've been. So take the stock and use the inventory and trust your tools. You don't need something new. You just need something remembered. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please like, subscribe, follow, and share with someone you think can benefit from this show. Until next time, thanks for listening, thanks for showing up, and have a great week.